Hello, everyone. Welcome to Cloud Wars Live. We generally talk about the digital revolution and what the heck is going on in the world today, but I think with some things that are developing around the world with the coronavirus, we're shifting gears here a little bit. We're going to try to bring some thoughts on that more into focus. And our guest today to help us do that is Chris Lochhead, one of our monthly guests. Chris has become one of the world's top podcasters around business and other things. He's got an interesting mix of ideas that he'd like to share, both regarding what's going on in the professional world, but these days, much more importantly, what's going on the personal side of things. Chris, thanks for being with us here. How you doing?
Dr. Evans, it's good to be with you.
Yeah, Chris, crazy times here. Crazy times. You've clearly put a lot of thinking into this. I know you've done some episodes on your very special podcast about this. What's top of mind for you today?
Well, it's shit's getting very weird, and it's getting weirder by the second. It feels like. I think if you turn on your television or if you fire up your browser, you hit refresh on your browser, and it's like, well, don't go to anything with 250 people at it, and then you hit refresh. It's like, don't go to anything with more than 100 people, and now we're down to 10, and so look, shit's getting weirder, and I think the only thing we can really know is it's going to get weirder. I mean, the Bay Area is. San Francisco Bay Area is on lockdown. We just locked down Santa Cruz County, where I live, and so I think that's the reality that we're in.
Chris, what does that mean in Santa Cruz County lockdown? What are you allowed and not allowed to do?
So like a lot of these communications, they could be crisper and clearer. So I don't believe we're being forced not to do anything. But we are being asked to hunker down in place and sort of, don't be out in the world unless you have to be. Stay home. Now, look, we live near the ocean. We went for a walk yesterday. There's people out. There's people surfing, and so there's more than some semblance of regular life, at the same time, there's not a lot of people in the grocery store, and there's not a lot of people. The mall's finished, I think, and that sort of stuff. And so I think we're getting to a place where restaurants and bars are pretty much done, and then other areas where lots of people congregate are sparse. But people are still walking around and surfing and doing things that they do. I don't think people are going to the gym anymore. So I think yoga's out, at least in a place with lots of people. So those sorts of things are all winding down.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry, yeah. I interrupted you there as you were rolling, but because I see those terms like quarantine, don't leave your room, don't leave your house. But so thanks, you gave us, a perspective of what's going on in, at least in Santa Cruz County, and probably very similar to what's going on in San Francisco and, more and more across the country. Yeah. My younger daughter said she's going to stay with her older sister and said, we're going to do quarantine together, is how she put it.
Yeah. So that's where we're at now. I don't know how many cases we have in the Santa Cruz area. It's a fairly small number, but of course we don't really know how many cases anybody has because there are many people who feel like they're symptomatic of something and they maybe want to get tested, and testing's still problematic, although hopefully that will get remedied pretty soon. I saw Jack Ma, his first tweet on Twitter was about donating masks and tests to the United States. So I thought that was cool. I think there's been some very cool things that tech entrepreneurs are doing. That's an example of a Chinese tech entrepreneur trying to do something for America, which is sort of, cool. And then, my buddy Eric Yuan, you and I are on Zoom right now, and as you probably saw, Zoom has stepped up and given their technology, at least for some period of time here, to all the schools in the United States of America, K through 12. So that's really cool. And Google stepped up to build a website and, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right. So I think there's a lot of cool things happening at that level. The other one I wanted to tell you about that's cool, and well, maybe let me take a step back. I'm hoping what we're beginning to see is sort of, if you remember what life was like for the first few weeks, or maybe even a couple months after 9/11, there was a deep connection between people. Whatever sort of normal things that might be, whether it was political or racial or whatever differences that were negative that people felt towards each other, seemed to melt away, and we stood as one. And so my hope is that that's what's beginning to happen here. It feels that way around here anyway, and it feels that way reading much of the media. But I'm curious what you're seeing.
Yeah, a couple things, Chris. I think on the one hand, and I don't want to jump right into the economy about this because I know it's a very personal thing, but you had the United States economy roaring along here, doing very well. Different parts of the world doing really well like this, and we forget sometimes that for the technology we have, for the advanced lifestyles, for the remarkable things that are going on, these really primitive, almost prehistoric types things, these viruses, they can come out of nowhere, and we realize. So I think it's going to ultimately be a good thing for people to understand, we are not at the top of the food chain in some ways. So let's just be smarter about how we go forward and do things. And as those, sort of mega scale ideas crystallize down to everybody, I see things like, the hoarding in grocery stores. It's on the one hand understandable. On the other hand, it's pretty dumb. I think that in some ways, there's been good advice coming out from people about what to do for health, and this sort of unprecedented, as I perceive it, this cooperation among big retailers and people, in the food chain, working together on some stuff, the healthcare supply chain trying to work together on this. I want to be optimistic about it. Maybe because it's early in this whole cycle, it's easy to be optimistic. But I think there are going to be some things that come out of this that tie in to everyday people's lives that transcend the troubles we're in. You mentioned Jack Ma, a Chinese entrepreneur, donating some much needed stuff to the US. So I'm an optimist and not trying to shut my eyes to the realities of this, but I think we're going to encounter and come up with some approaches to things, some ideas that are going to surprise us, I hope, in good ways. And there'll always be some of the sort of revolting things that we've all seen and will continue to see for a while. But I think when pushed pretty hard, most people tend to show their better side. And whether that's true or not, I really want to believe that at a time like this.
An optimist too. So I agree with you. And I think there's been a lot of negative said about digital and mobile and social technology, social media, making people feel bad and this and that and the other. And I think there's valid conversation to be had there. And right now, what we're seeing is the power of technology to make a difference. We can all feel connected. We can all use technologies where we can see each other and communicate like you and I are now on Zoom. We can, right now, social media is a godsend because we can communicate with our families. And, I can see how my family's doing, and they live in Canada. And so I can't see them next door. And so those sorts of things are, I think, very, very powerful and important. And I think we're also using technology to get on this virus. A mantra that I subscribe to is every problem's a data problem, right? And so whether it's researchers and scientists and, of course, doctors trying to work on the test itself or a vaccine, those things, technology we know is playing an incredibly important part. And we know that technology is playing an incredibly important part in companies being able to manage their supply chains, which is very difficult right now because, you think about any massive company, a Target, a Walmart, a CVS, and of course an Amazon, these kinds of mega companies that we are now discovering are essential services. if you think about the major food retailers right now, if one of them were unable to execute right now, America would be in a very difficult place. And I think one of the things that we're seeing is somebody who believes in entrepreneurship and believes in the power of companies to do good things. We're deeply reliant on these companies.
Chris, where I live in Pittsburgh, the neighborhood here, there's a fair number of people emigrating to the U.S. from Russia, mostly for religious reasons. And it's so interesting sometimes in the grocery stores around here, especially at places like Costco or Sam's Club, and you'll see some of these people who, they just stand, up until a couple of weeks ago, but they would just stand in the aisles and look around, just dumbfounded, like, how is this possible? So even I, coming from this country, I still marvel sometimes, as you mentioned, these essential services provided by, these giant supply chain or fulfillment or retail, whatever you want to call them, these extraordinary companies, even to the point where I saw a couple of days ago and a press conference with some government leaders and private sector leaders, but the CEO of Walmart and some of the other big retailers, Target, Walgreens, I think CVS was there. They were talking about they're going to cordon off parts of their parking lots to set up these drive-through test centers. So it's remarkable. I think these things will bubble up. And Chris, outside of that too, I thought, some of the notes that you had passed over is very interesting. Sort of, if you were going to offer some guidance to companies now, you had some pretty good thoughts on that. I think that apply across the board.
Yeah, so I think if we move out of the human realm for a second to the business realm, I think there's some realities that we have to sort of come to grips with. The first one is pipelines and revenues are likely coming down in a meaningful way here, right? And so if you're a public company, the likelihood you're going to miss your next quarter numbers is almost 100%, if not 100%, right? So pipelines and revenues, and therefore guidance on earnings, all that shit's coming down. Budgets and spending are coming down. Of course, consumer spending is going to come down massively, right? Because giant pieces of the population are just not, are in jobs where if they don't work, they don't get paid. And even if you're in a job that is not necessarily hourly, who knows how long this thing's going to go on? And will major companies be able to continue to pay employees at full rate for 3 months or 4 months, or I don't know, right? So the reality is the consumer is going to have a lot less money, and so are companies. And so, look, all our numbers are coming down. We're going to miss our guidance, and that's just the reality. And so, as we begin to all get our arms around that, sort of the question that I've been asking myself, Bob, is, if I was a legendary leader, what would I do today? And there's things on the personal side we can talk about. And of course, there's things on the business and professional side. But that has been the question that I've been sort of responding to in my own head for the last, I don't know, week and a half for sure. If I was a legendary leader, what would I do today? And, so in my personal life, we have parents that are in the high risk groups. And so we locked them down. And some of them wanted to argue with us a lot about it, Bob, particularly in the beginning, right?
Yes.
I won't say with whose parent, but we had a stern conversation with somebody about a St. Patrick's Day party. So, we've got to take care of those people. And then in our community, Santa Cruz is one of the things I love about living here is it's a real community. And in our neighborhood, 3 or 4 blocks plus or minus, there's a community email address. And of course there's Nextdoor and stuff, but there's been an email list for, I don't know, quite some time, since before we moved here. And, mostly it's stuff like, hey, let's organize. What are we doing on July 4th? And then something will be going on, or, somebody will have a bake sale, or I don't know, shit like that. Normal community stuff. It's all very nice, and everybody's very pleasant and so forth. And it gives you a great sense of connection. Well, since this thing started to really escalate, our little community newsletter, I'm almost feeling spammed by it, because the number of people stepping up and saying, hey, do you need us to go get groceries? Do you need us to help clean your house? Are you feeling lonely? Whatever it is, people just reaching out over email on our little neighborhood list here, making sure that everybody knows we're in this thing together and we're going to get through this thing together. And, so I think those sorts of things with our own family and our own neighborhood provide a real sense of, you talked about it earlier, connection. And I think we need that at this time.
Chris, I think it was interesting what you said there. If I was a legendary leader, what would I do? Not executive or CEO. And so there's this point about what can happen in the neighborhood. The first thing you said there, look after and lock down the old folks. One of the ways of looking after them is locking them down. But I could imagine there are some people that I didn't get to be 86 by having any young whippersnapper tell me what to do. But this tough love here has to go to their generation too. And we see that in the numbers. It's pretty clear. But that focus, I've seen some pretty interesting things too. Those, I think Workday gave 2 weeks, something like the equivalent of a cash bonus to all employees, and especially their contractors and other folks like that. ServiceNow is giving away some of its software, like, Eric's doing it with Zoom, for a while, to government agencies to help them try to get through as quickly as they can. So I think this is it's going to help the larger cause, and it's the right thing for these companies to do. So I think we're going to see a lot of that, Chris. But good leaders, this is where you can distinguish yourself, right? It's, when the economy's booming and unemployment is under 3.5%, it's not easy to be a leader, but, lots of companies are doing well. When things get tough, how do you become one of those few that step out and distinguish itself?
Yeah, look, it's easy to be great when it's great, right? The question is, who are you when the shit hits the fan? And the shit's hitting the fan. There's no question about that, both from a human health perspective. Listen, when a panel of experts at UCSF comes out and says 40 to 70% of us in the United States are going to get this thing, and if they peg the death rate at 1%, and you just call it 50% of Americans, to make the math super simple, which is exactly what they did in this discussion, by the way. So you got 150 million Americans. If 1% of us die, that's 1.5 million people. Now, does anybody really know what the death rate's going to be? No, because we don't really know how. I understand all those things. I think we all do, right? But what the experts are telling us is that this thing spreads faster and has a scary survival rate when compared to a normal flu that we're used to. That's what they're telling us. I love these people who are downplaying this thing. It's like, okay, well, look, I don't know. I didn't go to school for this. Okay, Stanford's not calling me, and UCSF is not calling me for my opinion. Here's what I know. The head of the World Health Organization said it was a global pandemic, and Italy shut down, and Spain shut down, and of course the Chinese shut down and went hard to the hoop on this thing. And so I don't know, are we overreacting? I have no fucking idea, but just look around, people. And so I think we have to we have to stand up like real leaders do. And on the personal side, I think we have to ask ourselves, what can we do for our communities and for our families? We're starting to cut checks to some nonprofits around here. There's hospitals and churches and other NGOs and nonprofits that are on the front lines of this. we're making a list of our favorite restaurants because we live in a food town, man, and the food in this town is incredible, and we deeply appreciate them as a huge part of our culture and life and enjoyment of life. And we're going to find out who's doing takeout. We're going to try and do business with them through these times, and we're going to buy some gift certificates. So we've put together a list of things to do in the community. And then to your point on the business side, I think we have to think about radically new leadership ideas, Bob.
Mm-hmm. Chris, tell us about a couple of those.
Well, the first one is, I think, if you're a great organization, probably you're going to lead this through marketing. And now I know I'm biased as a marketing guy and all that, but a big part of marketing's job is communication. And right now we need clear, thoughtful, radically transparent, non-biz, no babble bullshit communication. And so I think CEOs, CIOs, CFOs, et cetera, the C-suite right now is coming together with marketing to figure out how to communicate and how to lead through this, and how to be in the world with employees, with customers, with shareholders, with partners in a way that is authentic and real and transparent. And that's sort of on what you might call the defensive side. The second thing is, and we'll get to the offensive side in a sec. The second thing is, as we've been talking about on more of the personal level, now's a good time to do some good. And I realize it's going to be tough, and many companies aren't going to be in a position to do this, but the degree to which companies are, trying to put employees first, trying to put the community first. We're seeing a lot of incredible companies do that. Another one I'll mention in the tech industry, Mark Benioff came out on March 15th and tweeted, Salesforce and Time, because of course he owns Time Magazine now, will continue to pay our hourly workers even as many of our employees are now working from home. And then he asks people to do that too. He says, please pay an hourly worker you have a relationship with, perhaps a housekeeper or a dog walker, et cetera. And so you see companies like that stepping up. And I think if those of us in a position to do that or to do things along those lines, now's a good time to do some good. Number three, I think the reality is, of course, we are making budget cuts and reallocations. And so whatever our spending plan is, our investment plan for the quarter and for the year is, of course, those things have to come down. And so we have to think about what are smart cuts. And this is the one that a lot of people don't do. And look, as a CMO who's been through multiple, what's the plural of crisis, Bob? Is it crisis?
Crisis. Yeah.
Crisis.
Yes.
Crisis. Yeah, let's go with crisis.
Not many people know that, Chris. So if you get some blank looks, it's okay.
Yeah. Okay. So having been through multiple crisis, one of the things that people forget to do is budget reallocation. So instead of saying, and I'll just make up a number, I don't know what the right number is, but we're going to cut 20% of our IT budget or our marketing budget or our whatever budget. That might be a thing to do, but instead of making them across the board, can we get super thoughtful about what we can stop doing? And, one of those great quotes out there is, never let a good crisis go to waste. And so in the marketing world, by way of example, I know for a fact that there's at least 20% of stupid in almost every marketing budget, including ones when I was the CMO. So there's just, the marketing budgets can get a little bit like government spending, right? Where there's some entitlements, and it's like, well, why do we do that? I don't know. We just started doing that during the Nixon administration, and we just kept doing it. I don't know. So this is a really good way, if you're a CMO or a CEO or CFO for that matter, to get in there and whack some of those stupid things that tend to just pop up, and maybe enable you to make smaller cuts because you're doing smart reallocations.
I think, Chris, that what you were getting at there too, not just 20% across the board, but identify the years where good things can happen. It's going to be something that carries on. Then companies look at that and say, hey, why were we doing those things from 50 years ago? It's like, because 7 years ago, somebody said, well, the CEO plays golf, twice a summer with so-and-so. So that, yeah, I think there's going to be.
I heard one of these a while ago. So you want to get a quick diversion on that? So I have allergies, and my wife loves cats. So guess what? I go and get allergy shots, and we have cats. And actually the allergy shot therapy is pretty cool because they test you for your allergies, and they don't give you a drug. They give you a cocktail of what you're allergic to in small doses, and it rebuilds your immune system. It's actually quite fascinating, and it's worked incredibly well, but that's a digression on this digression. And so the allergy clinic that I go to is open every day from, whatever, 9:30 to 4:30 or whatever, sort of old school banker type hours, but they're not open on Tuesdays, Bob. And so I said, why aren't you open on Tuesdays? They said, well, the doctor who started this clinic, who was bought out by the doctors who own it and run it now, his son had volleyball on Tuesdays. And so he decided that that was his family was his priority, and he wanted to go to his son's volleyball, whatever's. And so he didn't open on Tuesdays. So we don't open on Tuesdays. No, they told me that with a straight face, Bob.
Yeah. And that was 30 years ago, but.
Or whatever, but it was so long. The guy's not even around anymore. So I don't know when it was. He's retired.
Well, now the plural of digression is digressi. So I'm going to digressi off your double digressi. And that is this little town on Lake Erie where my parents took us as we were growing up as kids. Just this classic, like little small American town. And there was one radio station there, and this DJ, Ken Vaughn, he would read the news every morning. And, one days a week, my mom just loved listening to this guy. She said, you won't hear any stuff like this anywhere else. And one morning, guy called in and he said, hey, Ken, can I ask? He said, I love, your show. I love hearing the news. He said, but you don't have any news on Monday. Why is that? And Ken said, every morning, he said, I go by the local town newspaper and I go to the diner. And while I'm having my breakfast, I take stories out of the newspaper and I write the news down that I read on the radio. And he said, but the diner is not open on Monday.
I love it.
So, but that's probably in the marketing stupid or stupid marketing. So there's probably,
right.
We've all do those things. So let's root them out. Why do we do stuff this way? We'll come through it better. I like your idea, Chris, about, get some of your smartest folks in the room there. Where does that take you?
Yeah. So this is just a simple idea that has been effective for me in the past. So take a topic like we all know our pipelines and revenue are coming down. So if you took 5 of your smartest marketers and 5 of your smartest salespeople, and you said, okay, we're going to lock you in a Zoom room for a day, with a bottle of Jack Daniels, and your job is to come up with thoughtful ideas on how to make smart budget cuts and reallocations in sales and marketing, by way of example. Or so that's on the defense side. On the offense side, right now we all need to think of short-term things that we can do to drive revenue for our businesses if our business is still functioning, right? And so there may be things you can do with your pipeline. There may be special offers that you can make. One of the simple ones that I like that we use incredibly effectively in the tech industry is something called white space analysis, and this is where if you have good data, it really matters because you can say, okay, we have 1,000 customers. And how many products, let's say you sell 50 products. Well, of 1,000 customers, who has all 50? That's probably a fairly small number. Everything else is white space. And so if you believe that selling to an existing customer is much easier and more cost effective than selling to a brand new customer, which all the research says that's the case, and it just seems pretty intuitively obvious, then if you know what your white space is, that is to say, who your existing customers are, what products or services they bought in the past, and what products and services they have not bought in the past, you have your probably lowest hanging fruit. So there are things like that, that if you get smart people in a room together, you get them fired up, they're probably going to come up with a few ideas for how to drive revenue in the near term. And I would suggest picking the simplest of those ideas, that is to say, the simplest to execute, the simplest to communicate, the most likely to resonate with existing customers, and get out there and see if you can, tilt customers who are at the tail end of the pipeline to the cash register, and take existing customers and see if you can do some white space sales and marketing.
Yeah. Yeah, Chris, and that simplicity that you talked about there, again, I think that's going to help some folks come up with some and do it. Why don't we do this all the time? Why don't we make this an adjunct of something that, goes along with our traditional services when things come back around? Hey, can I ask, would you go back to something you mentioned earlier? Your buddy or a CEO, talked about this is the next, the return of the golden age.
New golden age.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we just had Tucker Max on, America's favorite bad boy. And I found out, let me get this stat for you. He sold a bazillion books, of course. He, his book, he may be one of the most legendary book titles ever. I Hope They Serve Beer in Hell. That's a title for a book right there. And I just wanted to get this stat for you. Okay, so he's written 4 New York Times bestsellers, 3 of which hit #1. And he is the 4th writer, along with Malcolm Gladwell, Brené Brown, and Michael Lewis, to have 3 books on the New York Times nonfiction bestseller list at the same time.
Whew.
Yeah. Anyway, that's Tucker, and he's quite the character, and he's also a bit of a philosopher king. So he has this interesting point of view where he says that we're at the dawn of a new golden age, and my synthesis of his thoughts are essentially that this thing is bringing us together, so creating a sense of community and connection that was absent, and using technology to do that. And so he just sees this as a big stepping stone to a big set of changes. And it leads me to a set of questions I have for you. And, Tucker and I talked about this a little bit, so I'm curious what your thoughts are. So, for example, are we witnessing the beginning of the end of offices as we know them?
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you think about this, let's say this thing's over in 3 months, to the point where people can start going back to offices. After 3 months of not going to the office, is the world going to wake up and go, why do we have all these offices?
Yeah. Chris, a quick diversion. When I first started doing the not being in the main office, sort of a telecommuting, was 1990, so 30 years ago. And when I proposed this to the CEO at the company where I was working at the time, he said, he was shocked, and he said, how am I going to know what you're doing if I can't see you? And I said, well, here in this headquarters office, you never see me anyway. And if the value of what an employee does for a company is gauged by their ability to be seen, I said, that's a weird bar. It might be low, it might be high, but that's a weird bar. So, people's, the doctor's office, the allergist office, it's closed on Tuesday because of the volleyball thing 20 years ago. People will have irrational and irrational, but there's going to be so many folks pushing from the outside in this age of people trying to understand, we got to take better care of our employees. We have to offer better employee experiences. And somebody's going to say, oh, wow, I got to work from home. That's pretty cool. I didn't have to drive to the train station, get on the train, go to into the city, get on the subway, fight people there for half an hour, get out. I think there's going to be a lot of people that say this is a better way to work. This is a better
Well,
way to live.
it's exactly. And I, like you, have worked from home for many, many years. And, I started to think about the sort of meaningful kinds of work that I've done with people digitally or remotely. And in some cases, I'll give you a simple example. Currently working on my third book with the legendary Eddie Yoon. And Eddie has written more for Harvard Business Review on category and growth strategy than any person living or dead. And Eddie and I had done more podcasts than I can remember, had collaborated on my first book because he let us use a bunch of his research, and then I did a little bit of help on his first book. We wrote 2 HBR articles, and we began work on our new book together, all before we met in person. He's one of the most important guys in my certainly professional life, and of course, I'm somebody that your life is your life, and so we've become friends. And he shared about his family, and so forth and so on. We've become real buddies, right? And all that happened before we met. And the only thing that I didn't really know about him when we met is, how tall he is. That's really.
So what was it like? You knew this guy, you knew Eddie really, really well. What was it like when you met face to face?
There's, and I've had this experience a couple times before. There's a second where, and it really is just a couple seconds, where it's a bit stunning to finally see them, and then it's instantly over. This is, pre-COVID-19. By the way, I'm really looking forward to COVID-20 because COVID-19 has got some serious issues. But I digress. We have to be silly where we can, right? So there's a few moments where you're slightly uncomfortable, where there's that, oh my God, there he is. But then you hug each other and you sit down and you start chatting, or you do whatever it is you're doing, and all that goes away. And it's the exact relationship that in this case had been built over multiple years. And doing some, important work to both of us, and having some fun, and having a real robust relationship over email and Zoom and Dropbox and so forth.
Yeah, Chris, there's a related thing, maybe one of our multiple digressi in this conversation, that the whole WeWork thing, and WeWork wanted to desperately be considered a technology company, when in fact the revolution they're causing was in a related space to what we're talking about here. It's commercial real estate is ripe for some upheaval. And along came WeWork. And when they, I think, as they're beginning to understand their commercial real estate company with a different twist, not necessarily, the world's, coolest technology company, they can get some stuff straightened out. But companies are going to have to understand this more and more. I don't know if this is one of those genies that once it's out of the bottle, how are you going to get those people to all come back unless, you threaten them, and they're going to say, hey, great, the economy's picking back up again. I got a lot of other choices out there. I'm going to go work at a place that values what I can do, not where I sit every day.
Well, and to your point, particularly for lack of a better description, with white collar knowledge work, right? Nobody knows what you're fucking doing, right? Just because you're in a cube over there, I don't know what you're doing. So I don't even care, right? I don't care. And then in addition to that, my understanding is the average commute in America is roughly 45 minutes. At least that's what they tell us podcasters, So to make sure your podcast is not more than 43 minutes because you want to be, those people, nobody will listen to a long form dialogue show, Bob.
Exactly. Remember that,
yeah.
Chris.
Yeah, go F yourself. But another digression. But you say, okay, let's say 45 minutes is the accurate number. So that's an hour and a half a day. Well, when you say to somebody, hey, Janine, here's an hour and a half a day back. Hey, Fred, here, and then times a week, times a month. And you say, well, if the average, a lot of Americans don't even take holiday, but say the average American works roughly between 48 and 50 weeks a year, right? So I don't know, you can do the math better than I can because some of us didn't go to school, Bob. But what I'm saying is you give somebody an hour and a half a day back, you transform their life, because in that hour and a half, they can be physical. They can work out, they can be physically active and keep healthy that way. They can invest time with their family. They can decide, they have more flexibility around when they work. I'm much better in the morning. So I get up in the morning, I generally try to do something physical, and then I get right to work. And if I'm working on a book or something like that, often I'll move the physical thing to later, because the first 4 hours of the day are like really powerful hours for me, right? So I'll lock myself down, put on a set of headphones, and dig into something I'm working on, right? And use that time where I feel most sort of alert and creative and so forth. But whatever it is, my point is, an hour and a half a day transforms somebody's life to do what they want, to spend time with their family, to take care of themselves, to get the aggravation of the commute to go away. People have that Monday morning feeling, right? You take the commute out, and that Monday morning feeling is a lot different.
Wildly. It's almost exciting, right? Hey, it's Monday, all right, I can get going. But Chris, we've laughed about this line before, where people say, hey, look, it's not personal, it's business. It's like, I've never believed that. I think the two are fused in a lot of people. Well, that seems like the pendulum for that tilted way over toward the company side, right? Oh, good. Now we got these people for, another 3, 4, 5 hours a day. Well, it's time for that to snap back a little bit, maybe in exactly, the sort of outcomes that you've just described. I think that makes perfect sense. And in this time and age where it is, good, capable, talented, or even exceptional employees, they have the pick of any place that they want to go work. And companies, right, are going to realize this new advantage. So coming back to so many things about the transparency, this openness, really setting a different tone here and recognizing there's going to be a lot of things quite different than they were before. And I think you've pointed to a powerful one. An hour and a half a day, but if people sleep, 6 hours a day, there's 17, 18, you're giving almost 10% of your waking hours back.
Well, and you talk about sleep, all the experts on sleep tell us that the average American does not get enough sleep, that you can't bank sleep and get it back. So you can't sleep, 10 hours for 20 hours on the weekend, and then 6 hours or 5 hours and during the week, and make that all work. It's not the way the human body works, right? And lack of sleep is causing everything from car accidents to severe medical problems, to it's linked to obesity, and you name it, right? There's a sleep. If you start, that's a rabbit hole. You Google, hey, sleep shit, and you're going to you discover a lot. But the reality is, the experts tell us the average American doesn't get enough sleep. So yeah, just that piece, right, is incredible. I mean, we don't wake up to an alarm clock in my house. We just wake up.
I thought it would be to the cats.
Well, it often is the cats. Thelma, if you roll around in bed, particularly in the morning, as she's waking up, she likes to bite your feet as your feet flip around in the bed, and so when you got Thelma and Louise in bed with you, and one of them's biting your feet and the other one's licking your face, it probably means they want breakfast.
No wonder you're a get up and get out in the morning sort of guy. You've got some incentives there. Chris, we have had a chance to range across a lot of things today. Do you have a closing thought or two you want to share?
Well, yeah, there's a couple. So in all serious, well, one more serious and one completely ridiculous. So over the last 2 weeks or so, I've been digging into a lot of the research on downturns. And if you look at that research, from folks like McKinsey and Bain and BCG and a bunch of incredibly well-researched HBR articles and so forth. And if you like, I can give you the links of some of the things I've been reading to put in the show notes for folks. But what the studies say is pretty interesting, and it's around a thought you might think of as getting thoughtfully aggressive. What the research tends to say is the companies that perform best in downturns react very quickly in the beginning, so they break very big in the beginning. And then they're super thoughtful throughout the downturn. And what I mean by that is they make the right cuts and reallocations if that's appropriate. They try to take care of their people best they can. And then people forget that in an economic downturn is the time when most people, when shit's on sale and most people don't buy. And so some companies will do acquisitions. Some companies will do some aggressive category and brand marketing because that's one of the key things that people cut. So being thoughtfully aggressive coming into the downturn, and then as we're in it, if this thing's going to be multiple months, the way it looks like it could be, what are things that we could do to shore up our position, to begin to increase the likelihood of building long-term value and success and becoming dominant in the category? So being thoughtful during the downturn itself, and then being thoughtfully aggressive ahead of the recovery. These things are very hard to get right, of course. It requires a lot of thinking and discussion, and of course, a lot of data about our business, our market, our customers, our category. But in general, that's my synthesis of what the best articles say. And the research data says that, and again, it depends on whose study you want to look at, but somewhere between 9 and 14% of companies are able to outperform competitors by at least 10% on both top and bottom lines during downturns. And so the aha for me is, how do we, for the companies I'm involved with, the conversations that we're having are all around how do we be in that, let's call 9 to 14%, let's call it 12%. How do we be in the 12% of companies that actually use the downturn to our business advantage and drive revenue and profits way ahead of everybody else, because the data says that's possible. And so if it's possible, let's get after it. So that's the first one. Actually, I lied to you, Bob. I have 3 things. That's the first one. The second one is one of the things Eddie and I have been writing about is this idea called radical generosity. And I think now is a time for radical generosity. And I think there's radical generosity on multiple dimensions, but just by way of example, the first one, of course, is what can we as individuals and we as companies do that's radically generous? So you talked about the Walmarts and the Targets and these major corporations who are donating part of their parking lots for drive-through testing. That's fantastic. And tech companies giving away technology and whatever it is. So as a company, what can we do that's radical? As a person, what can we do that's radically generous? But as a company, what can we do that's radically generous? And I mentioned Tucker. So Tucker's got a business today called Scribe, and Scribe is essentially a author book creation and publishing service. So, somebody like you, by way of example, if you said, hey, I want to write a book, but I want help doing it, they help turnkey the whole thing at whatever level of help you need, from creation of the book to the marketing of the book and That's, he's top selling author. So he turned what he learned into a service, essentially. So what he's decided to do in this domain of radically generous is they're taking the core service that they charge a shit ton of money for and turning it into a course for free. And they're giving it away, and they're going to do some webinars and so forth. So as an IP consulting service business, they're trying to package as much of their IP up and give it away for free. And so I think asking yourself, what could we do as people, and what could we do as a company that would be radically generous, is a very powerful thing. I'm trying to be, I had this simple aha, which is, hey, wait a minute, dummy. You're a supposed marketing expert, right? And you've been through some crisis, right? Maybe you should get radically generous around sharing that. And so that's what I'm starting to do on my marketing podcast. We're going to start to talk about this stuff. Eddie and I are going to do a series of things. I'm going to bring in a bunch of marketing experts, and we're going to get after this thing. I've already been contacted by some venture capitalists and some other entrepreneur groups. And so I'm going to just, anything that I know about any of this, or can bring together other experts in the domain of how marketing can lead through a crisis, I'm going to do everything possible. And I don't want any fucking money for it, of course, right? So what are the things that we can do individually and as a company to be radically generous? So I think that's a powerful theme. And look, in the case of Tucker's company, or in the case of some of these other companies doing some of the things we've talked about, is there a business advantage to them over time for building this goodwill? Of course there is. That's okay. I don't want to hear criticism of that. It's like companies and people, we should be proud of them when they do good things. And if you give away the parking lot at Target and you say, oh, well, that attracts more people to come and buy into the Target, and so, well, fuck off. Come on, right? You can do good things that happen to be good for your company, that are good things for the world. And if all that lines up, well, why is that all not a good thing? Come on. So anyway, and then we do have Gwyneth Paltrow we could talk about, but I'll take a pause here.
Yeah. They say don't go over 45 minutes, podcasts.
Well, hey, nobody's commuting, so what else are they going to do but sit home and listen to Cloud Wars Live? Come on.
Yeah, absolutely. You know it, and I know it, brother.
But I like to say, hey, spread podcasts, not viruses.
Right. Chris, I think you have... in your classic form, you have overloaded my brain. As much as I'd love to get into the Gwyneth Paltrow whole thing, we just got to hold it for next time.
Okay. Well.
Not everybody can operate at the scale of your brain and throughput, and your appreciation for some businesses, the one that we're not going to talk about today, that are different. That's
fair enough.
And for the guy who follow your different, I see why you get it. It's some of the rest of us just need a little more time.
Yes.
Chris, great stuff. Thank you. Good perspectives, good counsel, good, I think just, probing at people now are the tendency, we have a choice to make, right? We all choose how we're going to respond to what's going on today. And I think you have given people lots of, not just some ideas, but a sense of capability, potential, and optimism about, the world is as it is right now. What are we going to do about it? How do we choose to go into this? And the generosity, the focus, the selflessness, radical generosity sounds like a good thing to do. And then a lot of the very pointed business counsel you offered up, I think, great stuff.
Well, thank you, Bob. And I appreciate that you continue to podcast. There's this expression we're all hearing, out of an abundance of caution, blah, 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 blah. And so the other one that I like right now, out of an abundance of caution, we will be releasing podcasts.
Yes, all right. Well, we'll check, and then we'll see who, let's have a caution meter. Who's the most, ¿quién es más cautioso? Yeah, we'll see. We got some new English words in here as well, Chris. See, Chris, thanks a million, my friend. Keep up the good stuff there. You're making a big difference as always, and thanks for sharing some ideas today.
Thank you, brother.
All right, stay well, Chris.
You too.
So long.